Hello, so this is the Bring On the Flash workshop. I'm Cat Rambo. I am a speculative fiction and fantasy writer. I am the author of the newly, just out this month, Beasts of Tibet, which I will hold up proudly now. It is a fantasy novel and the first of a quartet. But I also write a lot of short stories, and particularly a lot of Flash. So this class is based on one that I taught a bajillion years ago when I was a grad student at Johns Hopkins in the continuing studies program. And later on, I taught a version of it at Bellevue College as well. And so let's talk a little bit first about what is Flash, and because people's definitions sometimes tend to vary. I personally would say it's up to 1,500 words. Other people will tell you it is up to 250 words, or it is, my friend Casey used to run the magazine 10 Flash, and she insisted that 1,000 words. And it was not actually I had, she took a piece that was 500 words, and I had to expand it to 1,000 words as a result. So one of the things that you should take away from that is if you are submitting Flash to markets, do make sure that you check the guidelines and that your definition of Flash and theirs matches. But, you know, one of the things that I will suggest is don't worry about the word count until you're in the revision process. You know, when you're writing, just go ahead and write it, and you can always trim stuff down. And I've always found that trimming stuff down, for me, ends up yielding a better product. And people's process may differ. Some people kind of write by accumulation, and other people write big and then pare down. So it's up to you to kind of figure out what your process is. But generally, I find that, you know, don't worry about the length and write it, and then you can figure other stuff out. I really love writing Flash, and I like writing it for a number of different reasons. One is that it is just a good entry point into something. Sometimes if I am working on a longer piece, I will write Flash pieces about aspects of it. The book that I have now, Beasts of Tibet, there's a bunch of little Flash pieces that are sort of different descriptions of the city. They're supposed to be different guidebook entries. And those were a lot of fun to write. They gave me a little extra material to go with the book. But they also helped me learn the world better and helped me learn something about the characters. So that is sometimes, if you are stuck with a larger piece, trying to do some Flash in there may help shake things loose. Another reason that I really like Flash is that those of you that are working on novels, as you know, you sit down at the keyboard and you pound out perhaps several thousand words, and you get up and you know you still got a number of thousands of words left to write. By contrast, you can sit down and write a Flash piece, and then you can dance around the house and do your little I have completed something dance. You know, Danielle mentioned this. This is the sort of, you know, I have finished something, and it is like a piece of candy. It is like something wonderful because you can do something with it, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. And it's like, yay, that's done. So that's one way to cheer yourself on if you are in that sort of marathon slog of working on a novel, which just gets so painful. I like Flash because it does help you get at the bones of a story. And it makes you think hard about what a story is. Because a Flash piece does have to be a story. It can't just be a scene. It can't just be, you know, an image. At least I would argue my definition of Flash fiction, it can't be. And that doesn't mean that it can't be very short. But one of the things that has to happen is that something must change. There must be something that starts one way and ends a different way by the end of the story. And that is the plot, often, right? But with Flash, there is a particular phenomenon that can happen that I think is fascinating, and that is that change can happen sort of outside the story and can be a change in your perception of what's going on. And so, for example, let me point to a really famous story that probably a lot of you know by Hemingway, which is Hemingway's famous 6-word short story. And so let's just take a look at that pair of words by pair of words to see how it works. So it starts out, so, for sale, right? For sale, and that's an interesting, the stories want to start with a question. They want to, you want to give the reader a reason to keep going, and for sale is an interesting question. We all want to know what's for sale, what is for, what's being sold, why are they selling it, is it a good bargain, will I want it? Okay, so for sale. And then baby shoes. For sale baby shoes. And baby shoes are, I will argue, one of the cutest objects known to the universe, right? I don't know about you, but when I'm going to the store and there's a little rack of baby shoes, I stop and I go, oh, baby shoes. They're cute. They're adorable. They're tiny laces and soles, and they're just fabulous. So there you are as the reader, awash in sentimentality and thoughts of baby shoes. And suddenly we go to never used, right? And suddenly all that sentimentality turns to tragedy, because there's, you know why those shoes were never used. It wasn't that there were too many shoes. It wasn't that the baby's feet were too small. No, something sad happened. Okay, so your understanding of what's going on changes. And that is something that I think Flash does beautifully, and often does. Flash is also a place to experiment. If you're working with different literary techniques, Flash is a really good little laboratory for this. And one of the reasons that it is ideal is that often with kind of experimental techniques or devices that you're using, like let's say you are doing something radical, like you're leaving out the letter S. Which somebody did a while back in a story called Sing a Song of Susan, I think was the title. That is something that is going to be difficult to maintain at length, because the longer you do it, the more risk you run that your reader is just going to go, God damn it, I am so tired of this. And that's why something that is difficult for the reader, the longer you pursue that, the more readers are going to sort of fall off your particular funhouse ride. So if you want to do something experimental, do it in a piece of Flash, because it's so short, readers don't get a chance to get tired of it. And it's a good, I often think of Flash pieces used in this way. It's a little bit like doing scales, or it's a little bit like you've got that new pen or that new paintbrush or whatever, and so you do a little experimental piece first before you do something big and wonderful with it. You get a chance to kind of see how the nib works and all of that. Flash pieces are a place to showcase writing, right? They're tiny and tight and brilliant. I sent you guys a bunch of Flash pieces, and some of those I think are just amazing in terms of how much emotion that they managed to get in. Just crazy, in fact, how much emotion you can build into a piece of that length. So they're like little showcases, right? They're tiny display cases of how fabulous your writing can be. They have to be tight. One of the reasons that I think writing Flash is a really useful thing is that it teaches you to write tight. Because in a Flash, you don't have room to kind of shove in excess words. You don't have room for sort of the lint that sometimes accumulates on sentences. And of course, it's true of all writing. But in Flash, it's absolutely true. So writing Flash will teach you to write tighter. And finally, Flash is sellable. And one of those, the reason for that is, for one thing, economical. Right? If an editor is paying 6 cents a word, which is the current pro rate, if they are buying a 500 word Flash piece, that is significantly cheaper than, say, that 35,000 word novella. That 35,000 word novella, in fact, is pretty expensive. And that's why magazines don't print a lot of novellas. But there's a lot of Flash markets, or at least there's a number of Flash markets. One of my favorite, we'll talk at the end about it, but Daily Science Fiction is putting out a Flash piece every weekday, paying, I think, 8 cents a word right now. So, I mean, Flash fiction, and so I will point out also, if you are interested in joining SFWA, the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America, Flash pieces are often qualify you for membership. Okay. So there are reasons to write Flash. And there are reasons why I write a lot of Flash. And if you go to my website and you look at the list of publications, you'll see that I think maybe, gosh, about it, like a quarter to a third maybe are Flash pieces. They're fun to write. They're easier to sell. When I was working with Fantasy Magazine, you know, if I bought a 1,200 word piece, then I knew I had enough room in my budget for a longer piece. So I loved those little short, wonderful pieces. I can think of a number of them that I just adored, and they allowed me to run the longer pieces. So when I'm writing Flash, and what we're going to do in this class is I use a practice called timed writings, and that is pretty much exactly how it sounds. I will give you the prompt, and I will tell you it is time to start. You'll write. Usually we go for 5 minutes. I will say something at the 4-minute mark, so you'll kind of know that the end is coming, and then at the 10-second mark, and then we'll go around and share them afterwards. This is based on a book called Writing Down the Bone by Natalie Goldberg. It is a book that I find that many people either love Goldberg or they hate her. And it's because she's kind of hippie, new agey, and that, you know, that's fine. But she talks about writing as Zen practice. The rules of timed writings, at least for this class, are: 1, don't stop writing. Just, you know, when I say go, keep writing, and don't edit as you're writing. And one of the reasons that you're doing that is that whenever you're writing, you've got the writer side, right? That writer side just wants to create words. And then you get the editor side, and that editor side is the one that's kind of like, hey, you should stop and think about that sentence. Or, we need to go research that on Wikipedia for an hour before we continue. Or, you know, maybe that's not the right word. You need to go fool around with the dictionary. You know, so all of that needs to be put aside. And so with the time writings, one of the things that you can do is just, you know, say to the editor, yeah, go take a cup of coffee. I'm going to be writing for a while. And you could reassure the editor's side. It will get time to work with those words. But right now, it's just about the writer's side. So don't stop writing. Don't edit as you go. Don't cross out. Just keep going. If you have to write over and over, I don't know what to write, that is fine. I can tell you that I've been doing these for about 20 years now, and I have yet for anyone not to break through that at some point, because your brain gets really tired of that, and it starts supplying all sorts of interesting stuff. Personally, I think that if something is making you uncomfortable and your brain is screaming at you, don't go in that direction because it'll be too uncomfortable or too revelatory or people won't want to read that, that is probably the direction to go in. And I think that is about it. So what I want to do is usually I do this as exquisite corpses, and I'm going to tell you how an exquisite corpse works, but I'm actually just going to give you one, and we'll all write on it rather than go through the tumult of trying to generate them ourselves. But usually what I have people do is write an if-then statement. So like, if cats could sing, then the night would ring with music. Or, you know, something plain like, if the door was open, then ants are going to get in. You know, just a sort of if-then statement. And what we do is we go through and combine people, so you're basically working with your if statement and somebody else's then statement. Basically, you just want something kind of absurd to work with. And one of the things that I find about writing flash fiction is, you know, write about something absurd. Take a piece of poetry. Take something that, you know, is confusing or weird or contradictory, and I think it will yield something better, usually, than something that is not. Okay. So we're going to do a 5-minute timed writing. And I'm just using one that I've generated before. So we'll go for 5 minutes. I will do this as well. I will say something at the 4-minute mark, and then we'll, you know, at the end, we will go around and share them. And we'll be doing this several times in the course of the class. And at the end, we'll talk about kind of how you turn these word lumps into flash fiction, though I think some of it will become apparent. All right. So my prompt for you is, if fish could talk, then the beach would be much noisier. I am pulling up my stopwatch and resetting it. So go ahead and start writing whenever you like, my friends. And I am as well. You've got about a minute to go. About 10 seconds, so start winding down your last line. Okay, mine went weird and southward. I'm not quite sure about it. All right. Stuart, so intently finishing your last sentence. Would you be willing to read yours?
Sure.
Excellent.
Jonas walked the shoreline every day, 3 miles to the old lighthouse and 3 miles back. It's my thinking time, he told anyone who asked. He enjoyed the silent noise of the ocean, the gulls, the shifting sand. In the 6 months since his radiotherapy had finished, it had helped him keep sane. He'd lost the weight he put on eating junk food, and his feet were also smoother, the dead skin abraded by countless grains of sand sliding against it like weaponized silk. But something changed when the comet came. It took away the silence. The first day he thought it was a party, but when the dolphin jumped clear of the water and shouted a greeting, he realized he was hearing the voices of the deep. Jonas still walks the shoreline every day. Now he wears headphones.
Okay, I like that. Okay, and one of the things, right? That is a flash piece, right? You know, that has something that changes by the end, right? He starts walking, and at the end, he's not. Okay, so the bones of the story are there. All right, Nicola, how about you?
Sorry.
No worries.
I can give it a go.
Okay.
Finding the don't apologize thing very hard. If fish could talk, then the beach would be much noisier. We were lucky that it was only the crabs and the starfish, and maybe the clams. Scientists suspect their silence is voluntary. If fish could talk, then the beaches would be much noisier. Sorry. But Filey and Scarborough, Blackpool, Bridlington and Southport are wet, sandy deserts. They had to cancel the party conference in Brighton. The opinions of the crabs aren't relevant, a spokesman announced.
Okay, I like
That's everything I did.
There's a nice humor to that. I mean, and one of the things that I think works really well with Flash is often you can get really funny stuff going with it, and I like maybe the clams, and I think this is kind of cute stuff there. Okay, nice. All right, Molly, how about you?
Okay. This is a complete waste of time, Marcus said through tight lips. At least, I think that's what he said. I was having trouble hearing him over all the fish. Going to the beach isn't as much fun as it used to be since the fish started talking. That alone would be bad enough, but each fish species has its own language. Keep in mind the fact that some fish species are natural enemies and, well, the beach is very loud now and frequently rather rude. That's as far as I got.
Okay, awesome. And you can, again, it's like there's one of the things that you want to do often with Flash is you have an absurd idea and you spin it out and you think, well, you know, what would happen if the moon were made out of cheese or fish were talking or that sort of thing. Okay, cool. Mark, how about you?
Like everything I write, fueled by anxiety. All right. Did you hear about what he ate last night in the depths of the subterranean sand pit? That's where the crabs hang out. He ate crab food. He bottom fed. I stayed up at the surface where the minnows are sun-soaked and delicious, but in his shame he dove all the way to the bottom. He spoke with the crabs. Scandalous. Oh, ignore them. They're beached already. They're taking scraps from the audience. I'm not going to lower myself any deeper. I'm not going to head off to the shallows either. My place is right here in the prime continental slope, where nobody tells a fish what to do, and the food is the best. Now, where's a shark to go when he's all out of food? Where's everyone going? Oh, they've stopped listening. I'm sure they'll tire of being a spectacle once they humiliate themselves, debase themselves enough to want to dive to the bottom, after seeing how every fame-hungry finny eats human garbage. What those primates toss gets stuck in the throat. I'd rather starve to death here with the rest of the prime fish than go below. But, oh, I'm hungry. I'm seriously hungry. So hungry I could eat my own teeth. Look at them dance for coins, for wishes. 700 hungry human eyes watching us blabber on. Get us out of the sea, these beggars say. Get us out of the sea and into a fish tank, where we don't have to put up with the bravado of lionfish, the sleek gossip of morays, and the endless whining of an old piece of Paleolithic memory like myself. Dogfish indeed. Woof, woof, feed me. Better than being a catfish.
I like that. Okay, yeah, I think that was a lot of fun. That'll end up being a good piece, I think, as you play with it. Awesome. Kim, how about you?
If fish could talk, then the beach would be much noisier. Walking along, trying to enjoy the sound of the surf, all you would hear instead would be fish voices, more gruff and raspy than you'd expect, what with being watery creatures. Fish voices commenting on your clothes, because fish are very judgmental, though most people don't know it. Fish voices noticing that you're slower than the other walkers. Fish voices wondering if you're ever going to come all the way into the water, even though they know you won't because they know you heard them talking last week about nibbling on toes. Hearing all the fish voices wouldn't be all bad, though. Fish don't have a lot to do all day, so they'd be listening in on all the water's edge conversation, so you could get all the best gossip just standing at the ocean's edge. But if fish could talk and the beach got noisy, I think it might drive people to the mountains.
Awesome. I like that a lot. All right, Danielle, how about you?
How about now?
There you
Okay.
go.
All right. I have 2 mutes. All right. The morning that fish began talking, everyone stopped listening. The racket of their inane requests from the stalls in the market, from the bowls on children's nightstands, the din of complaints about nets and hooks and what is for lunch, what is for dinner, 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 overwhelmed everyone. Nobody had considered just how many fish sat around in our lives, and nobody had considered the fish. Not long after the fish started talking, my business selling shell-encrusted souvenirs on the beach exploded. People flooded to the oceans, to the lakes, to any bit of water at first. Not to listen, but to witness the strangeness. People bought my ugly trinkets to commemorate that experience.
Okay, so you got a good beginning there, right? That is something that could, one of the things that often happens with time writings is you get the good start, right? And you're like, this will go in another direction. The story begins to fall into place. And one of the things that I really believe in is that idea, Samuel Delany talks about writing to discover, right? Where you sit down and you start writing and stuff begins to swim into place. No pun intended. And so here is mine. If fish could talk, the beach would be much noisier because they'd be there supplying commentary, talking about what is and isn't to scale, how that shark last week embarrassed himself, and look, there, the little human, he needs suntan lotion. Who am I kidding? This is the worst sitcom idea ever. That's what you get when you crowdsource things. Some joker stacked the deck, summoned up her blog followers, and then before you know it, the envelope's arriving, telling you what to write about, and oh my God, it is not at all what you imagined it would be, but goddamn fish instead. Look, it can't go on like this. We can't be a nation of fish washers. But what to do? What clever plan not sure what the word is, what thing to reckon? That's why I'm turning to you, my friends. Just leave your solution in the comments, the one that seems to have the most support. Well, wait. I can hear the fish in my head uttering sardonic commentary. So, as you see, one of the things about doing time writings like this is they go in all sorts of directions. And that's kind of one of the fun things about writing them is I think one of the things that I stress in my sort of writing practice is the idea of connecting with your unconscious mind. And the more that you listen to your unconscious mind, the more chance that you get to let it talk and speak and fetch things to you, the more it will do so. And flash fiction and time writings are often a really good way to get in touch with that. You get it sort of in the habit of bringing stories to you. Okay, so let's do another one of these time writings. And what I'm going to do, actually, this time, is I'm going to give you, I have a Pinterest board that has a lot of different pictures on it for story ideas. I'm going to let each of you pick your own. I've put the link there in the chat window. So pull that open and take a look. I'm going to give you just a minute. So I will just keep sort of talking about Flash as you look. But when you're ready and you have your image, put in the chat window "done" to let me know that you've got your image. This is much like using a line of poetry. Often works well for time writings. Using something random. And one of the nice things about the internet is that you can find all sorts of random things on it, right? You can use something like stumble upon and just sort of go through generating story ideas. You can find things that will mash up things with other things, and just there's so much randomness in the world showcased on the internet, right? There should be no reason for anyone to have any dearth of story ideas. This is something that I would also suggest doing, is save these things for yourself. Have something like a Pinterest board or a notebook or a file on your computer where there are things that you know could generate good stories. If you run into an image that haunts you, often that's a good place to find a story. One of the things that I sometimes do when I'm working on a long story is I will also go through and find images that are evocative. Again, on Pinterest, I've got various boards called Storylands, and it'll say Storyland, and then it will have what the story or set of stories are that they're connected with. And basically that's stuff that if I'm a little stuck, I might go and look at it. Stuart, will you post a clip so I can see which picture you picked? Or the link? Just to entertain myself, I don't, as we're waiting. And you guys are welcome to use this later on if you want to. Ooh, that's a pretty one. Okay. You know, if you save the link and you will find. And actually, if you want to add more to it, you're welcome to. Just let me know. Okay. What are you? That's a pretty one too. The flooded New York City. Okay. I have a cat who just thinks he needs. Okay, so everyone's got one. Cool. All right, so we're going to do 5-minute time writing. And you can start whenever you like. You have about a minute to go. Okay, you got about 10 seconds. You might want to wind up your last sentence. Begin corralling it. No, no worries. Okay, so let's go around and hear some of them. Mark, will you start us off? Remember to unmute.
Here we go. Here we go. All right, you saw the photograph of dead Jesse James? All right.
Yes.
Did a good job on him, the sheriff asked. Mortimer, who hated that he'd wound up an embalmer because of his name, grimaced. Yep. He looked at the three lawmen, who stared down at the corpse of Jesse with strange eyes. He thought they'd be glad to have him in the grave and gone, but they stared with avarice, like you'd look at a gold ring on the finger of a spouse you could have never caught. He won't rot? Mortimer shook his head, wiped his brow with sweat. Nope, won't rot. He'll be fresh until next year. Good. Pay you triple, the sheriff said. They left the parlor with the casket to host what brief funeral Jesse'd get out in the dunes, to Mortimer's relief. Dead bodies horrified him. He'd have been a carpenter if it hadn't been for the early arthritis. A stiffening of the knuckles reminded him too much of a corpse. The funeral came and went. The way they'd stared kept him up at night. Mortimer couldn't let it go. He had to know what they saw. He waited till nightfall, after the bard closed up and the drunks had all staggered off to collapse like human puddles in their beds, and set out, his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth in the dry, cold night on his way to the graveyard.
Okay, lots of good stuff there. I mean, that's one of the cool things about the right image, right? It can evoke all sorts of good stories, and that is one of the reasons as writers it's a good idea to go to museums and look at things, and it's cool. Okay, awesome. Kim, how about you?
The old VW bus sat in the alley, rusting, graffiti-covered, abandoned, and unloved. Allison ran her hand gently along the front fender and up to the door. She glanced furtively around, making sure she was alone. Then she tried the handle. Unlocked. She was in. She slipped quickly into the driver's seat, closing the door and slumping down until she was sure no one had noticed what she did. She pulled her Swiss Army knife out of her bag and started fiddling with the wires under the steering column, hoping the battery she had snuck into the old van last week would let her get it started. She touched wires together. Nothing. She twisted more wires. Still nothing. She fiddled with the wires a little more, twisting them more firmly. The van started with a cough and a grumble. She nearly cheered. Her escape had begun.
Okay, awesome. And again, so like, this is one of the things I want to emphasize about the time writings, right? If this is not a practice that you've done before, this is a really good way to kind of discover things about a story, discover things about a world. Awesome. Danielle, how about you?
Okay. All right, there we go. Tatiana did not remember when the rain started. Nobody could remember when the rain started. The umbrellas knew, though. You looked carefully, you could see the edges fraying, fluttering like the elephant's eyelashes, glistening black with mold as the ceaseless rain drip, drip, dripped on her head. The elephants knew. At first they held their heads low, ears drooping, But now they walked as if the rain no longer fell, heads held high, shaking their heads as if they were on parade. The wagons knew. The rotting roofs, the stalactites the size of your arm hanging beneath the axles, Tatiana would break them off and use them as a walking stick to navigate between the puddles. Her shoes knew, or at least what was left of them. That's where I got.
Okay, awesome. Lots of rich detail there. Nicely done. Okay, Molly, want to take a shot at it?
I would, but I had a computer glitch and lost most of it.
No worries. No worries at all. How about Nicola?
You've been preparing for this for years, she said, putting a bucket under the light fitting. I've been coding. You've been coding an apocalypse in New York. That doesn't mean I'm ready for one. Are you ready to build a house out of logs and butcher a pig because you live in a house? Maybe I am. And she stands in the doorway, hands on hips, water streaming into her hair. This is the most exciting thing that's ever happened to me. I'm sure our deaths will be an awfully big adventure. The sound of the helicopter came again, rippling the water onto the window. We ought to go up to the roof, I say again. Feel free. She picks up another bucket.
Okay, I love this wonderful dialogue revealing kind of the relationship between the characters. Nicely done. Stuart, how about you?
1,000 red Chinese lanterns littering the sky, and the first thing I think of is bad German rock music. But the zeitgeist is right. It was right then, and it's right again now. 99 Luftballon. The tune is etched somewhere inside me, along with the childhood hope that nothing as silly as balloons would lead to war and the end of the world. For most of my life, the threat of nuclear conflagration has diminished. Now, it's the redness of the lanterns. They're so vivid, each of them glowing with internal fire, each like a soul in flight, fleeing the madness below. War's coming. It'll be oil or water or food that starts it, but the balloon's about to go up. I wish it was a lantern. That's it.
Okay, lovely. One of the things that this also, I guess you guys are producing such nice stuff. I mean, one of the things I love about these classes is people produce such good stuff. I did this is actually apparent which image I used. The hands I'm using today are very old, and I must be very careful with them. They belonged to my great-grandmother. The gold ring on the left hand was hers, and it's been there so long it's fused to the skin, because no one else would use them, knowing what she'd done with them. That's why they were in such good shape when I took them down from the shelf of others. The others are chipped, dented, scuffed, used, unadorned. I wanted something fine because I was going to sign official papers, enroll as a student in the college. I'd won a scholarship with my cleverness, but when I'd shown up to pick up the papers, I'd seen the official looking at me, my threadbare clothes, my worn hands, my something eyes. And so today I'll wear her hands, so fine, so well kept as only a lady's can be, and let them wonder where that ring came from. I think there's actually a fairly longer story going on because I like the idea of somebody picking up her great-grandmother's murderer. Actually, the great-grandmother was a murderer, I decided, so it's going somewhere. So are there questions about Flash so far? One of the things that I suggest doing is keeping a notebook where you are doing time writings periodically, or trying to write Flash, or even just sort of sitting down and writing whatever you like, but going through and mining it periodically for Flash. Usually what I do is I write it in notebooks, and I will go back in a week or two and look and see at the pieces. I'll look at the pieces, I'll see if there's any kind of low-hanging fruit. I'll look and see if there are any stories where it's like, oh, this is pretty much complete. And sometimes that happens when you're doing these, which is fun. And in fact, I think last time that We've Always Lived in the Castle story that's coming out in Daily Science Fiction is one that I wrote up that night and sent in. But I think that most cases it's easier to put writing aside and come back to it to make it better. I think that often when you first start writing it, it feels either very perfect or it feels very imperfect. And you're looking at it with very biased eyes because you've sort of been in there, and you have your own sort of filters that you impose. And after a week or two, your writing cools down to a certain extent. And I've heard different people talk about sort of the cool down period in different ways, and particularly with novels. Somebody said, wait until you get to the point where you pick up the novel and you find something that you'd forgotten about it. And Stephen King, advises, I think, putting it down for like a month or so. Flash, not so much. Flash, you can. I don't have to put quite the amount of long-term effort in Flash, and that is another one of the advantages. One of the advantages to finishing. One of the things that lets you, if you are feeling discouraged by your novel or feeling discouraged by the novella or whatever long project you're grappling with, sit down and write some Flash, and you will finish it, and then you can get it out circulating, which is what you want to be doing. What I would like to do is take a 5-minute break so people can go and get water or whatever, and just fulfill biological needs. So we will all reconvene here in 5 minutes. And I'm actually going to change this. One thing I want to say is if there are questions as we're going along, feel free to ask them in the chat window. If you don't want to interrupt me, I do check it periodically. Take a look at it. And if the chat window is not open for you, if you mouse over the left-hand side, you will see up at the top is a kind of blue speech bubble that will produce it. And it is a handy way. I'm actually looking for a blog post that I did on creativity that I thought might be useful. I'm having some trouble finding it, so I will post that link afterwards. Class. Because I think that, okay, yes, absolutely. Some of the techniques for spinning a fragment out of one of these pieces into a finished piece. And so what I do is I have the notebooks, and I go back to them, or I have actually what's more likely a stack of sort of random papers that I go back to, and I do go through, and first I look through, as I said, the sort of the low-hanging fruit. The stuff where I look at it and I go, oh yeah, this is a complete story. This is something has, there is something at the beginning and it changes and it there's a kind of ineffable feeling of completeness that I have a hard time defining. But it is that sense that at the end the door on the story has closed firmly but gently. So those stories are often don't require a lot of work. After that, if I'm looking for other ones, I will look for ones where there seem to be an interesting idea. And I'm not so much looking for ones where I'm like, oh, okay, this could be a story, but I'm looking for, oh, this is an interesting idea. This is something I would like to explore a little bit at like greater length. This is a world where everything's made out of glass, or the one that I just did with the hands, right? I know that I'm going to go back to it. And there, I'm trying to think about, once I have the interesting idea, I try to think about either what character is experiencing, what is the point of view character or the character that is being focused on, because that tells me a lot about the story. Because characters aren't, they're not like little Lego people that you just sort of fit into a plot structure. The minute you put a particular character into a plot, they begin changing it. It becomes their story because their actions are going to be defined by what they want. And that's, of course, the most important thing that you know about a character is what they want. So, I have this interesting idea. I think about this character, and then I think about what sort of problems would that character have, and most preferably problems created by the situation, problems created by the circumstances. If the world were made out of glass, what would happen, and what sort of problems would that present for somebody? And then, one other way to sort of get at that is to go back to the idea of what my character wants and think about what is preventing them from getting it. And preferably, what about these circumstances are preventing them from getting it? Because once you know that, you can sit down and start writing the story. And once you know that, the overall plot arc may appear to you in its entirety, or it will at least let you know what's going to happen next. Because you know what your character wants, and you know what they're going to be, how they're going to be doing it. Oh, I haven't looked at it. I'll have to take a look at that. One of the things that Connie Willis talks about is just to start at the point where the problem becomes a crisis. And I will say I think that is a good rule of thumb. I don't know that I would stick to it every time. It's going to depend on the story, but it's a very good place to start a story, right? That's sort of like if this goes on, I cannot bear this any further. The piece that Mark is talking about here, which I think this is a really good point, right, is conflict in good stories is not about spectacular events or painful emotions. Good conflict is about values. And boy, you know, then that's like immediately think a lot of people go, oh my God, values, because we get that attached, we get that built into family values, and so sometimes it gets weird that way. But yeah, values, right? Because one of the things that we come to fiction to is to figure out what it means to be human and what human beings do, right? We want to know what happens, you know, when your values are questioned. What values should you hold? How well do they stand up? You know, and I don't mean that fiction is didactic. It's not like there used to be the Mother West Wind's Fables, and every story had a little moral at the end to teach you to kind of clean up your room or whatever. But no, you know, good fiction is a comfort to you. Good fiction lets you know that you're not alone, that other human beings have undergone the same things. Good fiction gives you a chance to walk in somebody else's skin for a while and realize that it is very much like your own in ways that you might not have realized. Okay, I've moved into preaching this, so let me go back to kind of the idea of creating flash pieces. I think that you are going to, you know, what I do is I go back and I look for things that spark interest. You know, it may be an interesting idea, it may be an interesting technique, you know, maybe something I'm like, oh, I really like this idea of writing all the sentences backwards. You know, this is a sort of fucked up thing I might do. You know, so, and I'll do that. And I think that if you're not finding pieces in there that you like, take them and do another time writing off them. You know, take your time writing and circle 3 phrases that are really interesting, and then do 3 time writings off of those phrases and see what happens. You know, and the thing about it is this. You know, if you are writing and thinking about writing, you are getting better. And I would have to be actively feeding you misinformation to prevent that process, which as an ethical teacher I would prefer not to do. But this is a way to be writing. And one of the things that happens, one of the things that I get kind of furious about is people tell me, and I think this can sound so harsh, you know, because people come and say they're blocked. And I do understand that people experience writer's block for, you know, when you're under extreme pressure, or you are, you know, you're ill, or you're depressed, or, you know, I totally understand that. But I'm going to say, most of the time when people come to me and talk about writer's block, I love them very much, but my thought in the back of my head is, you are being lazy. And the reason I think that is because I know that you can always sit down and do a time writing. And yes, sometimes it's crap. Sometimes what you sit down and write is crap. It's total crap. And you look at it and you're like, oh my God, I wasted my time. I wrote 500 words of crap. And the problem, you know, the thing is that 500 words, it's a muscle, right? You know, that you exercise, and if you write it, yeah, it's like, yeah, I can't touch my toes. And he's like, well, bend over, asshole. I mean, sorry, probably shouldn't swear since we're viewing this. But yeah, you know, and so I get impatient, and one of the things that happens, and I'm very familiar with this phenomenon, is that it is much easier to procrastinate and not write through posturing about being a writer. And of course, one of the best ways to procrastinate on writing fiction is to write lengthy blog posts about how you should avoid adverbs and how first-person narrative works and all of that. You know, and I see a lot of people do that. And sometimes those blog posts are useful, right? You know, sometimes it's something that you've learned and you're figuring it out and you want to kind of share some stuff, and that's fine. But you know, if you're you know, do some time writings to counterbalance the blog posts if you're kind of going in that direction. And I do that too, right? You know, I'm as prone as anybody to being like, oh, I'll go build my brand on social media now. I'll go fart around on Facebook. I'm building my presence. And no, I'm farting around on Facebook. And any beneficial result of that is pretty much accidental. And, you know, and so you know. So this is a way to be writing. And am I saying you can sit down and do a bunch of time writings and generate a novel out of it? Yes and no. Yes, you can generate a bunch of words, and no, they will not automatically fall into novel shape. They won't go, and suddenly, whoa, it'll be like one of those transformer robots, and suddenly, all your little flash pieces, assemble. It's like Voltron, like novel shape. No, not going to happen. Sorry, sorry, sorry. But with some work, with some work, often that can turn into a novel. And that's what I'm doing right now, right? I'm writing the sequel to Beasts of Tibet. I'm writing Hearts of Tibet. And one of the things I do, I've been generating little pieces. I've got about 60, 70,000 words worth now. And at some point in the next couple of weeks, I need to go through and start looking to see where all my plot holes are. And where's the stuff that I need to be writing. Because I actually, yesterday's class, I realized some stuff about the book that I'm happy with, but it's generating a bunch of extra writing too. But that's good, right? It's fun. Does that answer your question, Molly, with some of the techniques for spinning a fragment out of into a finished piece?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
So let me talk a little bit about, and we'll do at least one more exercise, but I wanted to talk a little bit more. I want to talk a little bit about sort of where to find market listings, and also some of the markets for flash fiction. And I think this might be a good point to do it, just kind of break things up a bit. So places that I find market listings, one of them is Rollin.com. I'll put this in the window. I like Rollin.com. It has a somewhat outdated appearance, but the guy who runs it, Rollin, is very good about keeping it up to date. And sometimes you can find good anthology listings on there. Another service is Duotrope, which is also a submissions tracker. Duotrope.com. That is a paid service. So I am a little chintzy. So what I use instead is a service called the Submissions Grinder, which you can Google around on. And one of the things I do want to say about, though, any of those services is if you use something like the Submissions Grinder or Rollin or whatever, think about kicking them $5 once a year or so, just to kind of keep those sites free. How do you know when you've got something good? Okay, that's a really good question. Like, how do you know when something's crap and when something's not? There are a couple of ways to cultivate that. And one is just read really good stuff. Samuel Delaney says you can't write anything better than the best stuff you're reading. And I think that's really true. And one of the things that I try to do is not just consume crap, but salt in some good stuff as well. So that's part of it. Another is I think that being in a critiquing group is incredibly valuable. And I think that actually the act of critiquing is going to be more valuable than the act of being critiqued. I actually often find being critiqued a somewhat confusing and infuriating experience because everybody is insisting on changing things that I don't want changed. But the thing that I know about it is that if everyone is pointing to something in the story and saying this is broken, yes, it is most definitely broken, and probably none of the solutions that they are proposing are correct. It will take, I have to go away and kind of let that rattle around inside my head before I can come up with a solution. So those are two things, and I think critiquing is, I think critiquing is really useful because it makes you articulate things. It makes you go, wow, you're having a lot of trouble with passive voice, and then it makes you more aware of passive voice in your own work. I mean, often the flaws that you perceive are the things that you're having trouble with. Mark is asking about critiquing. The best form of stress test for a story is to send it out. But yeah, there isn't. It's and the second best thing would be to put it aside for at least a couple weeks. And because that does let you get distance. One of the things that happens when you first finish a story, well, there are a couple of things that happens. Among the many things that happens are, one, you have, at least for me, there is that flush of, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. This is so fabulous. I must send it out immediately because I must waste no time since this story is guaranteed to win the Hugo and the Nebula and the World Fantasy and the Tiptree and probably, you know, God knows everything else. I resist that feeling with all my heart because it is a false delusion. And I've always found stories are much better if I put them aside, because when you have first finished a story, there are pieces of it that are still in your head, and you cannot perceive that they have not made their way onto the page, because every time you look, the pieces in your head get in the way, and you're like, oh yes, it's in there, of course. So you have to give the pieces in your head, you have to give a little bit of time to be able to perceive those, in my opinion. And this is why, you know, I'm a terrible procrastinator about a lot of stuff. I was one of those people in grad school constantly writing papers at the last minute, and you know, when you're smart, you can usually get away with that. I don't do that with stories. I don't do that with stories for a couple of reasons. And one is that I know that the story will be better if I wait a couple of weeks. You know, if I give myself, build into the process time to write it and then put it aside for 2 weeks. And the other is that, you know, I don't want something out there representing me unless I know it's as good as it can be. And I know that on a few occasions when I put stories out that I wasn't quite satisfied with, I know they still irritate me a little bit. Yeah, it would be cool if the brain had a hard reset. I mean, they're just like so, and you know, at some point, you will be able to do that. You will be able to go, oh, yeah, I'm going to just totally forget writing this story and just going to, you know, and that's going to be awesome and weird and frightening. I mean, that's what, and a story in and of itself. But yeah, you're doing a soft kind of reset would be about the best equivalent of it. And one of the things that I certainly would do when you're rewriting, of course, and I think this is really important for flash pieces because they're so short that you have the luxury of doing this multiple times if you like, read it out loud. I read every piece of flash out loud, and I try to at least several times because they're short, right? You might as well. There's no reason not to. Because reading out loud is the best way to polish that I know of. So some markets for flash. Daily science fiction is, I think, a terrific one. I'm very fond of daily science fiction because, among other things, they take my work. I take a good bit of it. There is a website called Everyday Fiction. And Everyday Fiction is not a pro market. I think you make like $3 for a sale to that. And I do want to emphasize, if anybody is thinking they're going to make a career off selling Flash, this is probably not a good business plan. But Everyday Fiction does have some nice exposure, and they're nice folks. I like them a lot. Tor.com, if you are willing to have it sit for a while, Tor.com will take some Flash. Abyss and Apex magazine will take Flash, and they've placed some with them. Nature.com has a feature called Futures, which takes, I believe they're looking for pieces that are specifically 850 words. They pay a good bit, and that is a lot of nice exposure. And Strange Horizons would be another one that I think is very good. So your mileage may vary, but you know, the nice thing about flash fiction is you're really not. Oh, I forgot one of the sites I really want to recommend a lot, which is Quarter Reads. know about quarterreads.com? This is also, as writers, you should know about quarterreads.com. They are putting out flash fiction, and their business model is basically people buy reads for 25 cents each, right? So for $5 you buy 20 reads, and you could go on the site and read all these flash fiction pieces. And you can tip if you like the stories. But for writers, it's a really good place to be reprinting flash fiction pieces. Yeah, TikTok Girl's on there. I've got a bunch of stuff up there, and actually they were very kind when I put up Beasts of Tibet, and I put up a piece of flash fiction which appeared first on the site, and in fact is I think only available on the site, and we did a giveaway for the book. So yeah, I like Quarter Reads. I think they're, and you know, you as the writer, you make a chunk of the, you know, a chunk of 25 cents is not a huge chunk, but you make a significant amount of the 25 cents, which I think is nice. And certainly 25 cents is add up after a while. And since this is stuff that is reprinted, you know, it's not costing you anything. I really do. Yeah, Stuart's pointing at $10 so far. Yeah, it's a. I think I'm up to like $40, and so it's not, you know, it's not gonna. Again, Flash not a viable career option. No, don't. But as I said, it's a good way to get your name out there. It's a nice thing. Okay, so you guys ready to do another writing exercise? Or do you have questions about markets or sending stuff out? One of the things that you'll find if you are sending to literary magazines, you know, sometimes. So it's weird, right? So there's flash fiction, and then we got prose poems. And I think of flash fictions and prose poems as kind of existing on the same continuum, and they just sort of, you know, each piece is somewhere along that continuum. And I will say the prose poems, how do we mark that edge of the, I would say the farther we stray away from story structure, perhaps, might be one way to kind of delineate that. I would have to think about it. But if you want to send to literary magazines, don't just look to see whether they take flash fiction, but look to see whether they take prose poems, because you may be able to place there as well. I do want to say something about literary markets, which is that increasingly they are doing a pay-to-submit thing, and I am firmly against that. I don't think you should ever be paying to submit to a magazine ever, so I would avoid those. Oh, when you get feedback from a rejected, it depends on if the editor said I would like to look at this again. And if they do say I would like to look at it again, absolutely get it to them, because nobody's saying that to be nice. Anybody that says, you know, I want to see something else, they're not saying it just to be nice. They genuinely want to see something else, and you should send it to them. But generally, don't send a rewritten piece unless somebody has specifically asked for it, or if you query first and say you rejected this piece but you had kind words about it and I've significantly reworked it and I wonder if you would be willing to take a look at it again. Oh, I have to look at, is it TEDIC? And you know, it's a good question. One of the reasons that you want to be careful with that is, you know, the first line of defense for any magazine is the slush fund readers. And they are looking at the hundreds, literally hundreds and hundreds of submissions that are coming in and are trying to weed them out. And so what they're looking for are reasons to bounce stories. Nobody is looking at slush and looking for reasons to keep your story. People are looking at slush and looking at, you know, they're like, oh shit, I've got 350 submissions because I was bad and I watched TV for 2 weeks, and oh my god, I've got hundreds to go through in a single evening. Those aren't good circumstances. So if they, and in some places can tell, right? Strange Horizons has, I think, a database, and they will get pissy. Oh, whether you agree with the feedback. You mean whether you agree with the feedback, whether you resend it? Because I really, honestly, as an editor, if I rejected a piece, and even if I said something about it, if I did not specifically say send it to me again, I would be irritated to get it again. And I would probably bounce it without looking as hard at it as I could. Oh, absolutely. Only revise if you agree with the editor's suggestions. Most of the time, what I suggest doing is get your draft to the point where you're happy with it, and then start sending it out, and don't rewrite it between passes, between submissions, unless you get advice that you're like, wow, that's really good advice, that I am going to incorporate that. Most of the time, I would advise get the draft, get it the way you want it to be, the way that you're happy with it, and then start sending it out, come up, and you may have to send it to multiple markets. That is not a mark of failure of the story in any way. And that's why I suggest people get some time reading slush. I think it's a really good experience for people to spend some time as a slush reader. But a lot of times rejections are about perhaps they ran a story that was similar. Perhaps there was a story, like they've run 3 mermaid stories in the past 2 months, and you wrote another mermaid story. Perhaps it just doesn't agree. Perhaps, here's one of the things, is that every editor has their own ineffable sense of what the tone of their magazine is. And they're kind of like, this is an X story. And as an illustration, my friend Scott runs Beneath Ceaseless Skies, and I was there when he was first thinking about creating Beneath Ceaseless Skies. And I was all excited because I knew Scott liked my writing, and I was like, Scott's starting this pro market. I am going to just sell stuff to him right and left. This is going to be so awesome. And I sent him the story, and he bounced it back and said, this is a good story, but it's not exactly what I want for the magazine. And I was like, whoa, holy shit, okay. And I sent him another story, and again, he bounced it back and was like, yeah, this lovely story, not quite what I'm looking for. And it wasn't, I think, till the 5th or 6th story that I sent him, which was, I think, Love Resurrected, that he took it. And that didn't mean that those first 4 or 5 stories needed fixing, because they went on to other markets and sold without any tinkering. So, and here's the thing. I mean, like, here's how I would go through a batch of slush. I would go through and find, let's say I had 100 stories in the fantasy magazine mailbox, which is what we got maybe every week, or actually shorter. Every 3 or 4 days we'd had 100 stories. I would go through them, and I would say 90% of them I would reject, and I was able to reject them after looking at the first few paragraphs. Because the first few paragraphs tell you whether or not somebody's at the professional level. And that left 10% of the stories. And what I would do is I would put them aside, and I would come back a day or 2 later. And any story where I didn't look at the title and go, oh yeah, it's that story, they went. And that would weed out another 50% of them. But even then, that leaves me with 5 stories. And they can be 5 stories that I love. They can be 5 stories where I'm like, holy shit, this is dynamite stuff. And I probably am not going to take all 5 of them. I'm probably going to only take 1, maybe 2, because I have a limited budget. And I'm going to, certainly with those other stories, I'm going to say to the author, please send me something else. Yes, absolutely. And here's some of the things that are happening, that happen in the first few paragraphs. One is that characters that I know who my protagonist is within the first few paragraphs, that I know what the rules of the world are. And I know kind of, am I on the moon? Am I in space? Am I on Earth? Am I in Narnia? I know something of the rules of the story. Is this going to be a funny story? Is this going to be a story where magic is possible? I know, is this a story that's going to end up in heartbreak? I know something of the nature of the conflict. It's at least hinted at. Either, perhaps it's only foreshadowed, but I know something about what's going to happen. And here's the thing. The other thing is the prose. And it's basically the prose level. And it's whether or not, are they doing things like, are all their sentences clean and clear and straightforward? Is the image vividry? Is the imagery vivid? Is there sensory stuff going on? Is the world? Is the world become real? Do I have some sort of sense of the space of the story? But with the prose, okay, I want somebody who is going to deliver to my readers the equivalent of a roller coaster ride or a funhouse ride. And I want my readers to be able to read the story and forget that they're reading. I want them to emerge at the end of the story going, oh my gosh, that was a good story. Oh, I was totally lost. I totally forgot I was reading. And part of the reader surrendering to the writer and being able to experience that way is they have to be able to trust the writer. And they have to be able to trust that the writer is not periodically going to do the equivalent of stopping the track and flinging them into the abyss by reminding them that they're reading with something clumsy. And so if you have competent, clear prose, and if you are doing these things that signal to the reader that you are an author that knows what they're doing and that they can just relax and give into it, that is the story that I want. That is the story where the reader is those are the stories that the readers experience and then they come back to it later. Like I want them days later to go back and think, oh yeah, it's like that story. Oh yeah, remember that story about the two cities calling to each other? I remember that. I want some things to be memorable, right? I want stories that readers will love, right? Because one of the things about being a writer or being an editor is we know that deep love of the text. We know that lure of a good book. We know what it's like to pick up something and then emerge a day later, dazed and confused and very, very happy, abducted by books. So that, and one of the things as far as prose level goes, I recommend very highly a book called The 10% Solution by Ken Rand, which you can get from Amazon, which is basically shows you, like in the last draft, how to kind of remove the extra lint off sentences, which is very important in flash fiction. Okay. All right. Anything else before we do another writing exercise? Okay. All right. So let's do another one. I want you guys to take a minute, and I want you to come up with 3 possible titles. Okay, and just put them in the chat window when you have 3 possible titles. The nice thing is you do get to keep your titles to use as you like. I will not pretend that the typo is part of the title. No worries. Okay, so we've got, has everybody got theirs? Okay. So what I want you to do, oh, Stuart, are you doing? No, you've got them. Okay, so I want you to pick 3 that you like, and we're going to do a 10-minute time writing where you are going to combine those 3, and I don't care what you do with them. I'm sure it will be interesting. And what I'm going to do is make this an 8-minute timed writing, so you get a sense of it's going to be a little fussier than others. Actually, let's make it 10 minutes. Okay, does that sound good? 10 minutes for this? All right. I'm just going to arbitrarily say yes. You've all agreed with me. Yes, that is exactly what we're doing. Mix all 3 titles together to a pile of something. I would suggest you take them and write them at the top, and then, see where it takes you. If you don't end up incorporating them all, that's fine, but see what happens. All right, so we're going to go to 10 minutes, and I am starting now. You have about a minute to go, so begin corralling wayward sentences now. Okay, in 10 seconds. All right. Stuart, will you read yours?
I will, complete with a very strange sentence right in the middle. Okay. I used Professor Xiang's gossip machine, making sun angels and driving to eternity. Professor Xiang smiled. The sun in his back reminded him of his youth in Sichuan province, but only because of the heat and the facility of life to recall its start as it nears its end. 50 years ago, he held his little red book aloft and chatted with his comrades. Even then, he'd wondered what they really thought. If only he'd had his creation available. He pressed the ignition button, and the machine roared to life. This story's going nowhere. How do you make sun angels? Bao asked. With kisses and wishes, replied his mother, scooping him up and squeezing him tightly. Bao protested, wiping the kisses off his cheek. He stopped and stared over his mother's shoulder. The vehicle was like nothing ever seen, like a firestorm had been flashed onto a New Year dragon, and then the dragon had been cast in metal, and then the metal had fed the power of the sun. It flew across the highway. Mama, it looks like it could drive forever. Maybe it can, my little sun angel. I must tell my friends, Bao said. That's it.
Okay, we got lots of interesting stuff going on there. I like the sentence where it was like about the car being one thing, one thing, one thing, one thing. I thought that was a really neat structure. Cool. All right. Danielle, how about you?
Okay. I chose also Making Sun Angels, The Snail Loses His Mind, and Sun Trapper. Snail threw herself down into the dust and waved her arms and legs. What are you doing? We're going to be late. This feels good. Come try it. She reached up to grasp my hand. I pulled back. I'm not proud of it, but I also yelled. Have you lost your mind? It was the dust. Small mountain ranges had accumulated at the farthest reaches of her arms, revealing the green linoleum beneath her body. Flecks of sunlight flew around her, fragments of skin and hair, dander and toxins, the detritus of what once was, floated from the shape she created. An angel trapped by the sun, its wings pinned back by some ghastly entomologist. I stomped my foot, sending another choking puff into the air. It's time to go. Now. No, Snail said. It's not. It's time to live. What do you mean? But I knew what she meant. Nobody had lived since the dust fell from the sky. Not really. Nobody looked up at the sun anymore, too afraid of the shadows that might pass like a hawk pass overhead, too afraid of what might swoop down and destroy everything. Yet again.
Nice. Okay. I heard echoes of your children in the no.
Actually, Making Sun Angels is something my daughter, my 2-year-old, did. She threw herself down, and I was, what are you doing? I'm making a sun angel, Mama.
That's cute. All right, cool. Mark, how about you?
Okay, I think I only ended up using 2 of them, but whatever. I went with 15 minds, 16 channels, Where Did the Time Go, and one of my own, Professor Xiang's gossip machine. Xiang threw a cloth cover off of the gossip machine. The studio audience gasped. It fed into the back of each contestant via sneaking cords of wire. 15 in total. Each one sat before a glowing television screen, ready to begin the show. The audience held their breath as Professor Xiang put the starter pistol, loaded with live ammunition, into the air. He waved it. The machine is listening. You have 16 channels to browse. The race really begins the moment the first one of you becomes too boring to tolerate. He stroked his long mustache. The audience admired Xiang. His fashion and poise, gold Hawaiian shirt and designer flip-flops. The most talked about person in the world, the winner of last year's competition. Do you understand the rules as they've been read to you? He asked. Confirm with a yes. The 15 contestants all thought, yes, and a little green light glowed, hovering above their head like a bee. It was on then, each man and woman ready to think of as many things as they could possibly think of that might appease the machine. It stood by, glass tubes and wires humming with silent judgment. Contestant number 5, a thin man whose instincts led him down the perilous path of crafts and cooking shows, set the gossip machine off first. Dreadful, the machine cried out in the voice like the cracking of a light bulb. I've never seen such dull sentiments. You're horrible at this. His floating bee light turned red. Jiang spun the pistol around his index finger like a cowboy and fired one bullet right through his screen. First one down, he cried. Now, who will be the second dullest?
I want you to keep going so so we can find out. Awesome. I like that a lot. Molly, how about you?
Okay, give me just a second here. All right, I used one of mine, God of Glass and Frost, which I've known takes place on Ganymede, but that's all I've known so far. The other two, I grabbed Stuart's Falling Upwards, and I forget who, it was different last Tuesday. And what I came up with is this. Somehow the moonscape of Ganymede has changed. It stretches out before us in mottled chalk white and marble gray, same as ever, but I swear something is different. Maybe not something visible, but how can it be anything else? We're padded in these spacesuits, safe from deathly cold and any sensory stimuli other than sight and sound. Even though the sound is limited to what we produce ourselves, there's an abundance of it. Lang is loping along by my husband's side, chattering like a squirrel hopped up on cocaine. Nils, my husband, is a quiet man. He speaks seldom, mainly only when Lang asks him a question. But he walks with his head inclined toward the younger man as if straining to hear him in a noisy pub. When Lang forgets himself and steps off the Ganymede surface with too much gusto, Nils is quick to grab him and restore his feet to the ground. His attention is very much attuned to Lang. I'm not sure they even remember I'm behind them.
Okay, that's nice. I like that a lot. Okay, Nicola, how about you? Not Nicola, Kim.
Okay. I picked 3 and I ended up only using 2. I just didn't get to the third one, so I used Sun Trapper and God of Glass and Frost. She pulled her Sun Trapper out of her pocket, turning slowly, sidling from side to side in order to catch the best and brightest beams the next time the clouds parted. She knew there was stiff competition for selling some beams, but she had heard that last year a girl younger than she was had sold her very first captured sunbeams to the god of Glass and Frost himself for use in the prisms in one of his new palaces. If that girl, still a child really, could do it on her first try, then she felt it in her bones that she could do it too. She had to now. She had spent all her savings on a top-of-the-line sun trapper. She had to capture beams good enough for the best of the prisms, or she was going to be out on the street and her family right along with her. The clouds parted. She lifted her sun trapper, already imagining the heaps of praise her beams would get from the god of Glass and Frost, imagining that he would proclaim them the best he had ever seen and decide to build a new castle for them. She chased the beams across the rubble, dreaming of what they would bring her.
Okay, lovely. All right, Nicola, finish us off.
I'd actually rather not share this one.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. I will read mine. I started with Professor Zhang's Gossip Machine, Resurrection Dog, and the Snail Loses Its Mind, and the second one I only have in peripherally. The machine whirred, delivering a single slip of bamboo green paper imprinted with a line and flowing script. The snail loses its mind. What? RD said blankly, staring down at it. It's indexed, Marta said. We need to look it up. At the machine in the back, she scanned in the barcode on the paper's back. A chirp rang out and another piece of green paper, this time with many more words on it, slid from the printer. RD started to read it, but Marta picked it up, jammed it in her pocket. She was a shitty girlfriend, he thought, but there was something about her, about the way she shimmied when she danced, the crooked smile, the freckles behind her ears that drove him wild, drove him to try stupid things like Professor Zhang's gossip machine to find out if she really loved him. Pretending he was just asking how his youngest brother was doing in school, and there she was, snatching up the answer. Did she suspect his true purpose? Was that it? Did she know he knew she'd been wandering in neighborhoods she shouldn't have been, seen in, let alone eating and drinking there? She and he had appearances to maintain. That was the most important part of his business, appearing successful, appearing scary. Not to Marta, though. And I left off there. So I want to close by saying one of the things that I think often will help you spur flash pieces out of time writings is if you impose some constraints on it. If you don't just sit down with a blank page and say, okay, I'm going to start with a blank page, but if you start with a line of poetry, or you start with an image, or you start with, 5 weird words that you pulled out of the dictionary at random. I'm a big believer in this, and I think one of the things that you've seen over the course of this class is that you rose to the occasion, right? That that stories began to flow. That actually I would bet that all of you have at least one piece of writing where you're like, oh yeah, that's actually pretty good, and so yeah, that's what happens if you're willing to put constraints on it, because there's something about sitting down and knowing where you're going that helps you get away from that paralysis of the blank page, because a blank page is paralyzing, right? It's glaring at you. It's like, oh my God, you must put your genius upon me, and if it's not genius, I will laugh at you. And at least with time writings and prompts, you have an answer to that. It doesn't have to be genius. That's fine. You will make it genius later. That's part of the process. That's fine. There are only a few writers for whom there's only a few people of whom it is said they write perfect first drafts, and I'm not sure it's true. So we'll see. But I think a lot of people do. I think that probably the more often, if you are that kind of writer, sometimes the time that you spend thinking about it. Some people do write in their heads long before they put stuff down on the page. That is foreign to my process, and you will have to go elsewhere for help with that if that is what you do. All right, it is time to go, and it is sunny outside here, and I have sunshine to go enjoy. So I will see you guys at some point, I'm sure. Thank you for spending time with me, and please let me know if when you have pieces published that came out of this class, because they will be. Let me know so I can publicize them. If you're interested in other classes, I do have stuff up on my website right now. I think I'm taking June off, so I've got just a few in April and May, and then taking June off, and then I will sort of resume in July, August again. We'll see. Okay. Thanks a lot, guys. Take care. Have a lovely day.
Thanks, Kat.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.